Okay, we're going to get started here. Just want to say thank you so much for being here today. Really appreciate your time, and I'm really excited to share some information about responsive design basics and also Bootstrap 4, just in terms of how getting started and why we even use Bootstrap 4. So I'm really glad that you're here. So let's begin. So the agenda for today's workshop is just to give a quick introduction about me and my company, Bootstrap Creative, and just kind of where I got started doing this, and in terms of my training. I want to talk about responsive design basics and just kind of where it all started and why Bootstrap 4 is, in my opinion, very important to use when building sites or applications now. Also going to be talking about the mobile first workflow, what mobile first is, and how that applies to your projects. I'm going also to show you how to get started with Bootstrap, how to create a page using it, and just kind of showing the benefits of using Bootstrap. And at the end of the presentation, I also have a special offer for you that might help you as you are using CSS and also Bootstrap. So before I dive into the content, I just have a quick question in terms of what your opinion is on what percentage of English words, which is total of 600,000, does the average person know and use? If you would in the poll or in the chat box, just let me know what percentage you think the answer is. Okay, it looks like 45%, 40%. The actual number is a lot lower, which is 3% or 20,000 words. And the study that I saw even said that if someone that has like a PhD would have like maybe 4 or 5%. I was kind of surprised by the number being really low, but I kind of can relate to that. I'm learning CSS and HTML and JavaScript. There's just a lot of, or even Bootstrap, there's a lot of class names and properties and elements to memorize. And I think one thing I hear from beginners is like, how am I supposed to learn all the elements or all the properties, or how am I supposed to learn all the Bootstrap classes? And I think this is just encouraging to me and to beginners as well, because it helps you know that you don't have to know everything. And as long as you have a good reference, whether it's for English it's a dictionary or thesaurus, or for web development you have cheat sheets, you have books, you have Google searches, Stack Overflow, and just to leverage those key sources of information as a reference. In this workshop, I demonstrate how important it is to sketch your project with paper and pencil before you move on to the computer. This printable PDF sketch sheet will help you think through your responsive layouts following the mobile first method. You can download this free resource by clicking the link in the description. About me, I'm a web designer developer. I started out as a print designer. My background is in graphic design. I have a degree in that, and then I started doing brochures and logos. And at the time, I started doing website designs, primarily in Photoshop, that would pass off the design to a developer. And in one of my jobs, I was working on a website, and as I was communicating with the developer, I just came into a lot of conflict with him because the designs I was coming up with were just hard to develop at the time. At the time, we were using IE6 and alpha transparency and images. Like, in order to get the look that we're achieving, it just required a lot of JavaScript to get it to work. And if I understand the technical side of things, I would have understood his point of view. And so that was kind of the starting point of my journey to learn how to build sites from scratch. At the time, I was using themes and Dreamweaver, the WYSIWYG tools to kind of just make it more of a visual way of building sites. But then at that point, I knew that I actually had to learn how to hand code things and do them from scratch. I'm married and I have 2 boys, ages 4 and 2. And so kind of where I started, like I mentioned before, was just that I was a designer and I wanted to learn how to build websites. And so on nights and weekends, I did it as much as I could to watch YouTube videos and read books and tutorials, and started building a couple sites here and there until I was able to start doing freelancing to earn some side income. So I was able to build WordPress sites and do some themes like that. And so I did that for a while, and then I'm like, well, at my current job, they see me as a print designer. They don't see me as a web developer. So I was never able to kind of fully get that role at my current job. And so at that point, I knew I had to find a development job. And so after applying and finally finding a job, I had the job. But on the first day, my heart sank because I knew there's so much I didn't know, and I was getting asked questions that I had no answers for, like what repositories do you use, or what version control do you use, or do you know what PHP is, and all these JavaScript questions I had no way to answer. And so I freaked out and went home and got as many books as I could and did as much reading as I could. And I was just honest to my employer. I told him, I didn't expect to know how expect to have to know all this information. And he's like, that's okay. We kind of knew that you're somewhat green. And so they were very nice and walked me through the learning process. So it was a very intense time learning at that stage. And after that, and kind of now, it's just a roller coaster. Days I'm feeling very smart and knowledgeable, and other days I'm feeling, like I know nothing. So that's kind of where that yellow's coming on. And so through that process, I had a lot of scars along the way. And so I've always had a pull to become a teacher or to help people learn and trying to avoid the struggles that I faced. Because rather than coming from an engineering or a computer science background, I came from a design background. So it's a lot more visual and a lot more hard to understand the technical concepts. And so I thought that's where I could kind of help people learn in that way. And so I want to kind of help alleviate maybe the span of the gaps between the different transition points, and also maybe alleviate some of the stress points, and making maybe your first job not so stressful, or maybe your initial learning not so stressful. Whether you're learning Bootstrap or just any front-end development technologies or skills. So on the left-hand side is just my first website, and now today what I'm able to build. I just can show the progression. Like, you're not going to be able to build a really nice site in the beginning when you're first starting out. It just takes time and practice to just get comfortable and learn from your mistakes to build something that you're really proud of. And with my first website, I was extremely proud of that site because I did it from scratch. I didn't use Dreamweaver. I was able to start with a Photoshop design and then hand code it. And I was amazed at how these little tags and these little, these things that looked like gibberish to me at the time could actually build something that was useful. And that, I hate to say the word superpower, but it can kind of give you that feeling. And I think web development's fun for me in that way, because when you're building sites, you can do a lot of things with just like, code, which is really cool. So now I'm going to get into just responsive design, and I think it's really important to know if you've never done a responsive site, or if you're new to web development, to kind of know the history and where we started and where we've come. So when I first started building websites, we didn't have smartphones. The only thing that essentially had a web browser was like a Palm Pilot or just a small feature phone. And so primarily all you had to worry about was the desktop, or maybe even like a large monitor. And so at the time, the major framework was the 960 grid system. So if you're targeting a 17 or 19-inch monitor, and then for like the feature phones or the Palm Pilots, you'd have a separate domain that was a very bare bones site. You just have text and maybe a few images, because the download speeds were just really slow, and so you couldn't have like a full-featured website on those mobile devices. But in 2007, Apple introduced the iPhone, and they totally changed the game. Rather than having these mini feature sites or mobile sites, they said, okay, let's take these desktop sites that people currently have and make them accessible on a mobile device at a small screen size. And so they added a full-featured browser, and they also added the ability to use your fingers to manipulate the screen and to navigate different apps and also touch on buttons. And so that new input device made a new constraint as well. So like on a desktop site, you might have small text links or small buttons, but now on a phone, you might have to increase the size of those elements because your fingers are just wider and bigger than a mouse pointer clicker. And also, this just shows the adoption of mobile phones versus desktop, and it just shows the growth and quick adoption. And so that just means that there's a need to try to make sites more, just the user experience better on the mobile devices, because just the bandwidth was so high. Another thing that came into play was now everyone wanted to be into this smart devices or Internet of Things. Everything wanted to have access to the internet. So you'd find web browsers on game consoles, on phones, media players, ebook readers, TVs, tablets. And I think this device is only going to grow, or the list is just going to grow and grow. So you have device types, and then you have device versions. So every year, these companies release a new version, a new size. Maybe one have Retina displays, and then on top of that, you have different browsers and different ways and different browser versions. And so this just creates a big mess of just like compatibility issues, where as we're building a website, how are you able to target or make your site look consistent across all these different platforms? And one solution that has been developed is responsive design. And this is kind of showing what the initial problem was on the iPhone, where a standard desktop site was being squeezed into a mobile site. And you can see how the text sizes are really small, and even the image gets kind of zoomed in. And the way that you would have to read these sites is you have to pinch and zoom or double tap to read them, which is just kind of a weird user experience. And so with the bare bones responsive design, this is the basic technique to get your site to be responsive. And it would just be to add this meta tag into your head of your document, which tells the browser, don't scale on my web page. I want it to just be 100% as intended. And then you'd use media queries to kind of target different window widths and say, you know what, at the minimum width of 500 pixels, I want to make this text red, or have this column be at a certain width. So it gives you fine-tuned control based on the width of the browser window. And then with the 960 pixel grid that everyone was using, it was all fixed width. So you started out with your container being 960, but then you did your math off of that. And so everything was hard-coded pixel dimensions. And even in your Photoshop design, everything was hard-coded pixel dimensions, so it translated. But in responsive design, you can't do that anymore. Now it's all fluid, so you have to use percentages and rems and ems and with auto instead of pixels and points. And another important element for responsive design is a CSS reset. And there's been multiple that have been developed, with like Eric Meyer reset is a popular one, but then the one that's really popular now is Normalize CSS. And Bootstrap 4 uses Normalize, where they kind of customize it, and they call it reboot.css. And what that essentially does, it just helps make a uniform display of CSS styles or HTML elements across browsers and devices. So one question I get a lot from developers, or one of the problems that I see is that they have is like, when I build a site, it looks different on different browsers or different devices. And so why is that? And one of the big reasons why is because there's multiple browsers, but there's also multiple versions. And so different browsers support different properties. And the reason for that, like for Internet Explorer, for instance, they support certain features, or they have their own custom alpha channels or different properties to kind of work with their software, like Microsoft Word or PowerPoint. And so they might have some things that other browsers don't have, or even Safari. They might have different properties that they want to support on their devices to kind of go along with their iPhones and things like that. And so one way that these browsers pick and choose what properties they want to support, or even change how they're handled, is with vendor prefixes. And so if you're wanting to have consistent styles, even for like with Flexbox, you would have to take into consideration these prefixes, these vendor prefixes. And so that can be overwhelming for a beginner. Like, how am I supposed to know what browsers need what prefix and things like that? Like for someone that's more advanced, you can use SAS and run it through this tool called Auto Prefixer, which automatically adds these prefixes for you. But for a beginner, and you don't know how to do that, it's kind of hard to know what to do with that. And so a lot of people are gravitating to Bootstrap because it's already figured out for you, where you just add Bootstrap to your document and it's already has the prefixes already added. And that's one reason why a lot of people are liking it, because it kind of alleviates those cross-browser compatibility issues for you without having to write those properties yourself. Okay, Edward has a question. Just take a pause here and just, if there's any questions, I can answer those of what I've said so far. Why do you have to normalize the CSS? Well, the reason for that is, if you were to compare like a H1 heading and maybe a paragraph text and then some form elements, if you just had a basic page with those things on the page and you looked at them on all the different browsers like Safari, Internet Explorer, and Chrome, and you compare them, they would all have their own different way of looking. They had different styles that are built into the browser, and that's one thing that's kind of was confusing to me in the beginning. Like, if you think about it, we have a style sheet that we have applied to our web page, but a browser actually has this internal style sheet that it uses to render different things. And so what Normalize does is tries to make that more consistent across all the different browsers. So hope that answers that question there for you, Edward. So what Bootstrap was just a step beyond just responsive design. Well, responsive design is good and everything, but how do I avoid having to write all these prefixes myself, and how do I avoid reinventing the wheel with like coming up with like carousels and modals and And so it was a toolkit that was used by Twitter for internal websites and applications. And then they made it open source, and that's when people were like, "Whoa, this is awesome," because it solved a problem that so many people had. So some of the benefits of Bootstrap are it's already vendor prefixed with CSS3 properties to avoid browser bugs. It has a stable grid breakpoints for common device widths because they know they have a better understanding of what is the common devices and the different things to support. So without relying on them, you would have to do that all by yourself, and I think that would be very daunting to know what to do. And I think one big thing for me was just built-in compatible JavaScript behavior. Before I used Bootstrap, I would have to go and do Google searches for just different jQuery plugins, and every developer that created these plugins would write their own CSS styles, and they'd all be written differently. And so if you can imagine pulling all these resources together into one web page, you're going to just have a Frankenstein of code where you'd have to overwrite styles and do import it and rewrite different things. It was just a mess because they weren't written by one person or by one team of one way of thinking. And so the nice thing about Bootstrap, you can have modals and carousels and drop downs. That's all written by the same developer using the same naming structure, and it just works together very nicely. So it's a very nice toolkit to use. And the fact that it's open source, so it's free to use and it's maintained. One thing that could happen with open source is that projects are started and then they maybe the person gets a full-time job and they're just no longer able to maintain it, and then it just becomes like a public project. But with Bootstrap, started with Twitter, and then it kind of became a part of GitHub. And GitHub is just a large developer community, and the creator, Mark Ardo, he works for GitHub now. And so a lot of people have complained about the time that it has taken to build Bootstrap 4. But I think since it's been such widely used and adopted that it's just under a big microscope. And I think that's kind of why it's taking so long. I think they're trying to build it to be very, very strong for the future. And I think that's just a great approach. I think that must be very hard for them, the developers, to have the negative feedback, but then still develop on it. And so I just think it's going to be, when it's fully released, I think it's going to be really good. So this kind of shows the overall usage of Bootstrap, probably more version 3 and 2. There's 12 million sites across the world used Bootstrap. And if you compare it to other front-end frameworks, it's definitely the leader in that area. And if you compare it to WordPress, which is another very popular open source project, has 19 million. So to compare those is pretty amazing to me. And I also was curious to see, well, what is the trend when Bootstrap 3 was released in terms of just job interest of people looking for people with those technology skills. And you can see just an upswing of search. And when you compare that to other libraries of Bootstrap 4 and Boilerplate, there's definitely a large demand in that area. And there's obviously a lot of speculation about what could happen when Bootstrap 4 is released, if there's going to be the same upswing. But I have, my opinion thinks you should probably see a very similar trend. And all those 12 million sites, they're probably going to want to migrate as well. So there's definitely a lot of work to be had in knowing Bootstrap, and I think it's a good skill to know, not only Bootstrap 4, but also Bootstrap 3. Are there any questions on that section? Okay, thanks. Keep going then. Okay, now on to the mobile-first workflow. So how many of you are familiar with the design process? Ever designed a website or any type of project? Okay, great. Edward has some experience with the design process. So here's just a quote from the person that coined the word or the phrase mobile first, and it's a phrase that you often hear when you're looking with websites that are maybe hosted by Google or any like Google documentation. They're really pushing that term mobile first. So what his quote says is, screens are small, connections are slow, and people often give you their partial attention or short bursts of their time. Designing for mobile first forces you to embrace these constraints. So I think with any design process or any design thinking, it's very good to understand the constraints of mobile devices. And so I think that's a good way of understanding why we even are doing responsive design, or why we even have to think about it. Just very important to know what those constraints are. And so with the design process, it really just comes down to, in the beginning, before you even get to the browser, before you even get to the Photoshop or any type of design, you're starting with a strategy. Like, if you're building a website, what are we trying to do with this website? What are our goals as a business, and what are the needs of the customers that are coming to our website, and trying to find a common ground between those two things, or if it's an application or a tool, what do we want this application to do, and how do we think people are going to use it? Because really, you're just making a lot of assumptions on what you think is going to happen or how it's going to work. And so you do your best guess or estimate, and you come up with a strategy where you're trying to achieve, and then you come up with a prototype. And oftentimes you do this with sketches, or you would do like a wireframe, and then you maybe use Bootstrap to create a very quick prototype. And then in the design phase, you might use like just do one page in Photoshop, and maybe a couple versions of designs and see how that works. And then you would pick one and then fully build that out, and that would be your delivery phase of the process. But that it doesn't end there. Then you have to do a lot of surveys. Then you have to do heat mapping to see how people are using your website or application, and also to measure it against your goals that you set out in the strategy. And maybe over a couple months, you'd say, is this design achieving our goals in our strategy? And if it is, great. And if it is not, then you have to kind of maybe go back a couple steps and maybe rework the design or come up with a new approach. And that's one other term that you might hear around is an iterative design process. And that's kind of what this is. It's just like a cycle. A design is never done or never finished. And so this is kind of my approach, starting with the pencil sketches. And I usually do this mobile first sketching process. And I have a PDF printout that I have that has like the different sizes where I do my sketching. And it allows me to kind of really work through the design before I even get to the computer, because I think the computer oftentimes can limit you, or it can solve your solution before you even think it through. And so you're just doing it because maybe you found a cool site or a cool component that you want to use. And so I think the longer you can start using Bootstrap, the better. The more you can figure things out before you use it will really help out your design not looking like Bootstrap. And so I move on to a wireframing tool. You can either use, there's a free open source tool called Pencil. You can use Balsamiq, you can use PowerPoint, Adobe Illustrator, whatever you need to do to kind of just rough out the framework of it. And then from there, then you go into the prototype stage. And what I like to do is, based on what my initial thinking for the design is, I kind of want to be able to click through and see if it's going to work. And so when I look at the existing Bootstrap components and say, okay, I can use this carousel because it's pretty close to what I want, or I can use the nav bar, or I can use this grid structure. But if there's any holes that Bootstrap can't fill, that means I have to create something custom. And so I make notes of that, or I might say, I want to customize this default Bootstrap component. So I think this is kind of important to note that you're trying to push your strategy and your design on Bootstrap and push it to where you want to go, versus the other direction where you just using Bootstrap and then customizing it. I think that'll really push your design to be more what you are looking for, and avoid kind of letting the default styles influence your design. So once you do your prototype and you're kind of able to get some functionality down and see how it navigates or works, then you would actually go through the process of running your custom styles and really push the design to achieve your initial vision that you might have had approved in Photoshop. So some of the development tools that I recommend that are free and just really good to use are, you have a GitHub account, which you would use your version control system. And if any of you use a Mac computer or even a PC where you have like a backup of your files, that's basically, in my opinion, what a version control system is. It's just a way of having a backup or a step process. And it just allows you to have like a memory bank of your code changes, and it's really important because like sometimes you might go 5 steps ahead and then you're like, oh man, I totally broke my site. I need to go back a couple steps. That's why version control is really nice. And so you can have your version control in your repositories, which are just like your projects essentially. And then you would have GitHub Desktop, which is a tool that allows you to have on your running on a computer that could sync up to GitHub on the web. And so you can work locally and then push your code to GitHub on the web. And then they also have this tool called Atom Text Editor, which is really great to have your code colored and highlighted, and it's just a really nice tool to write code in. And then working locally, I recommend using XAMPP. And what that does, you could run a PHP server on there, but I just strictly use it for HTTP. And so that allows you to link out to GitHub or Bootstrap minified files off their CDN servers, and it just allows you to make those quick connections. Because if you didn't have this, it wouldn't work. You might throw an error, and it just allows you to work like a normal website would. And then I primarily use Google Chrome because they have a really good DevTools system, and I also like their extensions. They have a lot of good web developer extensions. One of them that I use is called Live.js. And what that allows you to do is you run it, and as you make a change in your CSS or your HTML, it just auto refreshes the browser. And so that's one less step you have to do, and you could have you maybe an external monitor with your Chrome window open, and just every time you could change, it just refreshes it for you. Are there any questions on that section? Okay, now I'm going to just, since there's no questions, I'm just going to move on to the next section where I kind of show the different types of pages that you would build, and kind of show how responsive design works versus just a static page. And so this is just a quick sketch of something I want to build. It's just a very basic site where I have a large heading at the top, a large image that would span the full width of the browser, and I want to have 2 columns on a tablet and on desktop. But then on mobile, I want those paragraphs and the bullets to be stacked. And so this is just kind of my sketching process to kind of show the functionality I want. And then I also want a Google font for the heading to kind of customize the way that is looking. So this is just a basic page without any responsive design code in here. And so I just want to show what happens when you look at this on a mobile device. So I'm using Chrome here, and then DevTools, to enable this DevTools panel, you just can right-click on here on the window and do inspect. And then inside here, there's this little device preview tool. I'm going to look at an iPhone 8. And as you can see, the image is still large, and the text is really small. And if I compare that to a responsive page, the text is larger and the images are scaled down. And this heading is the same size as I want it to be. And so as you can see right there, I got a better user experience. Like it's more readable. There's no like horizontal scrolling. But one thing that I don't have set up right now, or actually I do, I have the columns here. And so I did some custom code here to write these columns. And I'll show you how that looks in the code area. So if I was going to do this without Bootstrap, what I would do in my HTML document, you'd have this viewport here. So that says don't scale my page or anything like that. I want to have my own style sheet here. And then in my CSS, this whole big chunk of code is the Normalize.css. And this is getting that browser consistency across browsers. And then for the body, I'm setting my font family standard serif, font size 16. And this bit of code right here is just essentially just making this image responsive. Rather than having a fixed width, I'm saying I don't want to get bigger than the 100% value of the image, but anything below that of the 100% of the image, as the window gets smaller, I want it to scale and get smaller. And this container, if we look at this, it's kind of like underneath the body tag, and I have this wrapping the whole entire body of the page. And if I look at this page, the one without responsive code, see how it gets really wide and it just goes from edge to edge of the window. But this, I have a container here, and so it has white space on the left and right hand corner. So that's what that's doing. And then I set this media query to say at this min width, I want it to be 140, which kind of what this is here. And then margin 0 auto, and so that centers that container inside this window. And so this is my code for the grid column that I created here. So I have my row, my columns. And so the downside of writing your own code, you have to know if I'm doing Flexbox, I have to know these vendor prefixes. And I kind of alluded to that earlier, that you just have to know what's supported. And if you're a beginner, it could be a lot of mess. And so if you're relying on this, I think the danger with this is that, and this is something I faced before using Bootstrap when I was doing client work. I get a call like after releasing a project, and it says my site looks horrible on an Android device, or like when I click on this, the keyboard is on my the Android keyboard isn't working. And so if you're writing your own code, I think there's a lot of things that could happen that you really don't want to have happen after releasing a project. So let me compare that to a Bootstrap coded site. I think when you're doing your own custom code, you're going to have most of your effort into the CSS style sheet, and you're going to have your HTML document pretty clean. But with a Bootstrap site, it's going to be the opposite. You're going to leverage the HTML document more. And by that, I'll show you where we have that same meta viewport tag, but then we have the Bootstrap CSS. And then I have included the Google font CSS here on my custom style sheet. And then primarily what you're going to be having is just a lot of class names. And so I have this image fluid here, which just makes this pretty much the same properties as what I wrote earlier, where it just has a max width and then it scales the image down. But here I'm using the Bootstrap Grid, where I have a container, and then you have a row, and then you have your columns. And so this is saying I want to have a column that at the median breakpoint, and everything above that, I want it to be 6 columns wide. And everything below the median breakpoint, I want it to be full width. And so down below, I have the JavaScript, and you only need to add this if you're using the jQuery functionality. If you don't use it, you don't even need this stuff. But the Bootstrap jQuery the Bootstrap JavaScript that you need is jQuery, because it relies on jQuery. And then you have this popper plugin, and then Bootstrap, and then below that you add your custom JavaScript. And I'll show you the look for that, which was achieved. And so this just shows the custom Google font and my 2 columns here. And then if I resize my window, or just do it this way, this will kind of show you the breakpoints as they go. See how there's more space on the left and right column? So that's all been figured out to work with tablets and the different sizes phones. And so if you weren't relying on Bootstrap, you have to figure that all out on your own. So that kind of shows the different ways of building pages. Are there any questions on that section? Okay, I see one question that was probably from the design section. Just what wireframe app do you recommend? I've used Balsamic, but I actually recommend just basic tools. Since I'm a designer, I've used Adobe Illustrator, and so I actually prefer that tool. But I've used PowerPoint because they have a very good. You drag a box in there, and you have the text already centered in there. And so my wireframes are very basic in just terms of determining the hierarchy of elements, to say this content section is more important than this content section, or I want this to be, my carousel, things like that. I know some wireframing tools are even more advanced than that, where they kind of show even down to the, the component level where things different look, or how the form inputs look. I mean, it's all up to you, or how far you want to take it. But I guess if you want to go that level of detail, I think Balsamic or an open source tool called Pencil would work for that. But I personally just keep it basic. So since there's no other questions, going into this next section, I just want to talk about, since if you're new to Bootstrap, or you're kind of new to responsive design, I think there is a lot to learn. Not only are you learning how to build a web page, you're not learning about HTML, CSS, but you're learning how to work with these new constraints. And I think that's very important to know. And so I think when you're learning, you're just going to have a lot of repetition, and it takes a lot of practice to kind of know, when I do this, it's going to impact that. And so this quote here just talks about learn by doing. Repetition is the mother of learning, the father of action, which makes it the architect of accomplishment. And so with my training, what I want to do is I want to give you the tools and just equip you to get the practice that you need to learn. And so in doing so, I created this Bootstrap for Quick Start. And essentially what this is a tutorial to help you build 2 projects that would give you the practice I feel would help you have a good level of understanding of how to use Bootstrap in your own projects. So in this book, it's a PDF ebook that's all hyperlinked, that you can link out to different snippets of code, and it's something I constantly update. But you would first start out kind of what I talked about here, but just in more detail. Talking about the mobile web and the history of Bootstrap, what's new in Bootstrap. Before I go into more detail about Flexbox Grid, I have a lot of code samples and tutorials on Bootstrap, or I'm sorry, in Flexbox with a cheat sheet. I go into detail about the design process, and then I show you how to build a homepage, building the prototype, actually starting through the strategy, doing the sketching, the prototype, and the design for those 2 projects. So I want to show you what these 2 look like, what you could be able to build. The first one is the admin panel. So I have this dismissible alert up here. This is not part of Bootstrap. It's just a custom JavaScript plugin called Chart.js that I use. That's really nice and responsive. So this will just give you some practice. You kind of work with a CMS dashboard. This is a customized drop-down menu. I kind of pushed the default styling of the drop-down to have these icons and also these little drop-down arrows here. And this is the marketing homepage that you would build. I customized the default carousel functionality to be more of a crossfade. rather than a slide, because I thought the slide was kind of jarring. So this is a nice, I thought, a nicer presentation. Show you how to use these image cards. One thing that I get asked a lot is how do I do parallax? So I kind of show you how to do that with your design. And then as well as these just these image cards that you can use for blog posts and things like that. Because like one thing that's common when you're using a CMS, or you don't have control of the images. And so I created these components where you can put text overlay an image that could be, dynamically generated. And from the design standpoint, you wouldn't have to like rethink the image because it's got a background color of this dark background. So whatever image that the blog post is using, it should work with this design. And one thing that's kind of important to note about Bootstrap 4, that no longer has icons included. Bootstrap 3 included glyph icons. So I kind of show you how to use Font Awesome, which is another icon library that I highly recommend. So I show you how to use that. And I also kind of customize this form area here. And let's show you what it looks like on a mobile device. So those are the two projects. So if you were to purchase a starter package, is my my basic level. It's essentially those two. You learn how to build those two projects. And also include a Bootstrap 4 cheat sheet, a Flexbox cheat sheet, and a CSS cheat sheet. And I think those are just good reference tools to have as you're working on the project, the different projects. A step above that is a Pro package. It includes everything in the starter package, but it also includes this components visual reference. And I thought if you're brand new to the framework, it's hard to know what the component names are and what they are visually. So it's just a quick document to kind of run through the different components rather than going through the documentation, just a quicker reference. And it shows you a picture of the component, and it has a link to the documentation, and it has some common use cases that you could use with those components. And I have a PDF version, but I also have a digital version. And essentially what this is like a code repository, essentially taking all the snippets from the documentation and putting them into its own HTML document. And I even customized it to make them better. And so this is something you can add upon for yourself. Like it's just like when I'm using Bootstrap, I just reference this document. Well, I need a nav bar, boom. I know kind of how I want it to work and look. And so I just use that document versus the documentation. So I provide the PDF and also the code version. I also have this glyph icons and Font Awesome cross-reference PDF. So if you have a Bootstrap 3 project that you want to migrate over to the Font Awesome icons, this document will help you do that. I also provide this web design and development primer. When I started my first development job, there's a lot of things I didn't know. And so when I did like thinking through those things, I kind of put everything into this document, like learning about URL structure, how to write clean code, how to work with version control, what are some common best practices of writing CSS. Put that all in this document to kind of give you a quick overview of just the web in general. And the other thing I included is just working on a website. So you're constantly looking at how your design or your web pages look across different breakpoints. And so Chrome DevTools allows you to preview one breakpoint at a time. And so to me, that kind of got old after a while. So I included this tool called Robin. It's like a multi-point break preview tool. And I'll show you how that works. You run it locally, with your XAMPP localhost. But what you can do it's already in here. So it has all these preloaded breakpoints that you have loaded, and I have the Bootstrap 4 breakpoints, but you can also add your own based on what you're looking to do. And you would add your localhost URL in there and hit refresh, and then I can quickly just scroll horizontally and see all the breakpoints. So oftentimes you just make one style change and it has an impact on different breakpoints, and it's hard to know what it did. And so this is an easy way of seeing what happened or how it impacts your design. And if the scrolling is annoying, I kind of sometimes zoom out. So that way I can get a quick view of everything at once. The thing I include are 2 video tutorials. Another thing that I think for a beginner that's kind of a little confusing is the Chrome developer tools, because the the developer tools panel is, in my mind, kind of catered to JavaScript developers or more advanced developers, and it's hard to kind of segment like basic and advanced. So I kind of walk you through using the dev tools if you're just working with CSS and making style changes, how to address like drop-down menus that you want to style, or adding your own classes just in the browser to kind of see how they work or how they look, modifying properties, things like that. And another thing that people often ask me is they don't necessarily maybe know how like FTP works or how a server works, or they don't have hosting. And so I wanted to provide a quick way for people to share their projects with people. And so I think GitHub Pages is a great way to share projects with people. So I show you a tutorial how to do that, and I also show you how to use Dropbox if you have Dropbox account to have your HTML, CSS documents there, and then share them with others using Dropbox. The Pro package also includes all the project template files and access to my Facebook group where you can ask questions to the community. I have 350 people in there right now, and I'm also going in there, to answer questions. And if you're not a fan of Facebook, you don't have a Facebook account, that's okay too. You can ask questions to me directly. The other package I provide is the design package, and so I put this together thinking about someone that is maybe more of a web designer or someone that's going to be creating a lot of websites for their clients or for a company. And so I provide my PDF, sketch sheets to help you walk you through the sketching of the, through the different breakpoints, and also provide my Photoshop templates. And one thing when I was, working on designs, I would look for the PSD template, and I would find these PSDs that were great and everything, but they included the components already designed in Photoshop. And so immediately my vision was tainted by those component designs. Like I was, designing my elements to look like Bootstrap does. And so that's another thing that I heard from people is like, how do I make my web pages look different than Bootstrap? And I think that this is one way you can avoid that. It's like if you just use the grid, the colors, and the font sizes at a bare minimum as your starting point in your design phase, then you're pushing your design on Bootstrap and not the other way around. And also this Photoshop template includes just a mock-up. The right-hand corner kind of shows that where if you were to make a change in your mobile design and you hit save, it would automatically update into that document. And so it just makes client presentations or even showing your employer new design variations a lot easier. I also include Bootstrap for color reference, where it just shows you all the colors, the hex values, and RGBA colors, and just an easy way to kind of reference those colors and throughout your work if you're wanting to reuse them or maybe extend those colors. And another thing I want to provide is that if some people have saying, I'm not very good at design, I'm more of a back-end developer and I want to improve my design. Well, I'm offering some coaching to help you through that design process. I could offer, a critique of your design and give you some pointers on how I think you could maybe improve the design based on your strategy or your goals. Or you might just be a new developer and you created a project and you want someone to kind of review the code. How can I make it cleaner? Or I know that this is my online portfolio, so I know that people are going to be scrutinizing my code. How do I make it look as good as possible? And so I'd be offering you that service. So in the beginning of this, I mentioned how to get that CSS, reference book. I'm offering this to anyone that purchases the Pro Design package today. Within the next 2 hours, after you purchase, I would just follow up with you and say, what's your email, what's your address, mailing address, and I'll ship this book out to you through Amazon. That way you have that at your desk as you're working with Bootstrap and CSS. You'll have a quick reference for that. And in order to do that, below this presentation, there's the different packages listed, and you just would click the button, you click out the checkout, and you can either use a credit card or PayPal. And then there's a download file screen that allows you to download the files to your computer, or you can even add them to your Dropbox account. And with all my training, this is something that I'm committed to. And so every time Bootstrap 4 is updated, I update my files on my documents. Or if you find a code bug or you want something corrected, I can quickly ship those out to you through these channels. And so you would get an email notification saying, hey, this file has been updated, or this has been updated. So some common questions I've received have been like, is Bootstrap 4 okay to use in production sites now? And I think yes. And the reason I say that is because it's that we're beta 2. And from the project milestones I see set out. They have a new beta 3 version coming out, and after that, there's nothing else listed. So there's one more beta, and then we're going to be coming out to the full release. And so if I was building a project that needs to be last for 5 years, I would, as long as I'm able to support IE 10 and then above, I would definitely consider Bootstrap 4. And can I just learn Bootstrap 4 with YouTube videos and official documentation? I think for me it would be difficult, because when I was learning, a lot of training that I found on lynda.com, Udemy, or YouTube, they were outdated. They were servicing the alpha versions of Bootstrap 4, and a lot has changed. And not only that, I think a lot of it is not updated. And so one thing I find a challenge with video tutorials, it's hard to adapt them to the current version. And so that's why I really believe PDF documentation is really good, because you can make quick text changes, make quick code changes, and it's a very rapid improvement on that. And what if I don't like it? Well, I stand behind my work, and I put my heart into this, and I really believe it will help you. And if it's not something that you think it does not working for you, don't like how it's put together, I definitely don't want your money, because I really just want to help people, and I want to help you just be the best developer as you can be. So if you're unhappy, just let me know, and I'll give you a full refund. Again, thank you so much for being here. It's just very nice to be able to talk to you, and I know it's hard to, obviously impossible that we can meet in person, but I feel like this is the next best thing, and just very nice to talk to you today. Take care.